The new points of contact, the additional points of contact are: 1, embodiment, experience as the basis of indigenous knowledge that is shared through performing. Let me repeat that. Embodiment, or experience as the basis of indigenous knowledge shared through performance. Indigenous epistemologies and practices which enact the unity of feeling, thinking, and doing. Some of this work follows from the performed ethnographies staged by Victor and Edith Turner in the 80s. It critiques classical, quote, objective, quote, Western scholarship and respects indigenous theory in and as action. 2, performance ecology as holistic action. The convergence of the needs of threatened species, threatened environments, and threatened cultures. I want to repeat that. The convergence of the needs of threatened species, threatened environments, and threatened cultures. It's not like we can separate those assaults on the multiplex world we live in. It's all together. Who, quote, owns, quote, the resources? But what are resources? The resources intellectual, the resources artistic, the resources ritual. Who owns these resources of indigenous peoples? Is the concept of ownership appropriate or outmoded? So whenever I go to a museum now, I wonder who owns it. I was at the very marvelous Museum of Afro-Brazilian Culture and Art yesterday, and it's a marvelous museum, but like all museums, it has the problem. These artifacts, these costumes, these photographs are of some people. I don't think they own them anymore. Who does own them? And it's not just a question of the physical artifacts. As we'll see as I go on, it's the intellectual property. It's even the notion that there is intellectual property. Why should ideas be property? Why should property be property? So these are very fundamental questions that if anthropology, by etymology, is the study of human beings, it's the study also of our value system, and if the convergence of anthropology and performance says that things are enacted, that's how we really get knowledge, then we have to ask the underlying questions. Okay, that's the second point of contact, performance ecology as holistic action. The first one was embodiment and experience. Third one, performing the real. I don't know if that can be properly translated, but you know, your everyday life, our life, actual things, what we see in the news, which is already the real as cooked, performing the real. From performed ethnographies which conflate social, political, and aesthetic actions to Boalian theater, from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa and the International Court of Justice in The Hague, from Occupy Wall Street to the Arab Spring, from anthropology's traditional method of participation observation to active listening, change from participation or observation to kind of stay as much on the outside, just put your toe in the pool in order to get some sense of it, to something much more engaged, to active listening. The problem arises of how to promote change, advance human rights, and inscribe the rule of law without also performing neo-colonial or neoliberal impositions of outside values. These questions inform and trouble both anthropological and performance studies discourse. And fourth, the last one, the brain as a performance site. Is the mind a muscle? That phrase, the mind is a muscle, is based on Yvonne Rainer's 1968 dance program in New York called The Mind is a Muscle. By that, I mean, can the brain be trained? What do trance performances, catharsis and empathy, mirror neurons, and emotional training techniques such as rasa boxes, which is a technique I've developed, have in common? What does recent research indicating that some learned behavior can be coded into the genes and transmitted across generations say about traditional knowledges that rely on, quote, brain tuning, unquote, by means of rhythm, music, dance, and song? Are we, after 2 centuries, about to rehabilitate the theory of the heritability of learned behavior proposed by Jean-Baptiste Lamarck in the end of the 18th and beginning of the 19th century, and continued to some degree by Lysenko in the Soviet Union? That's just beginning to wonder now, how deep does cultural training go into the brain, and is it possible to inherit learned behavior? It's part of this old discourse in anthropology between nature and nurture. It seems that nature is nurture and nurture is nature more than we might expect.